Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this video please subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet I'd love to see you join me. And don't forget to like and let me know what you think in the comments. My name's Ethan Miller. Back when I was 32, I saw some seriously messed stuff in Helps Canyon, Oregon. At the time, I was Mr. Survival Expert, you know? 4 years in the military, deployments to places that would make your teeth chatter just hearing about them. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepped me for what went down on that trip. It all started with Liam. Met him about a year before. Journalist. Sharp as a tack, good-looking, and wouldn't let a story go if her life depended on it. He had this crazy fascination with folklore, especially anything spooky, devils, demons, ghosts, the whole shebang. Naturally, he gets hooked on the legend of Hells Canyon. Rumor was, this tall dude in a black suit haunted the place, making deals with desperate folks. Liam, being Liam, convinces me it's the perfect adventure. Any other day, I'd have laughed him out of the room for chasing ghost stories. But the guy was infectious with his enthusiasm, and honestly, I was cocky about my outdoors skills. Plus, we weren't going alone. We had David with us. Tech entrepreneur, mid-30s, loaded. He was bankrolling the whole thing. This guy was all about go big or go home lifestyle. Always bragging about his extreme vacations, skydiving in Patagonia, shark diving in Australia, you name it. It was David who got it into his head that we needed to explore some abandoned mining town, supposedly up in Hells Canyon. Said it would be epic footage for some documentary he could brag about. David was used to getting his way, thought money could fix anything. Then there was Chris, David's assistant and cameraman. Quiet dude, maybe 27, from a rough part of Portland. Chris had seen enough real-life horror gangs, crime the works. Supernatural stuff, not his cup of tea. Still, he followed David around like a shadow because David was paying. And Chris was chasing that big break in film that David kept dangling in front of him. Or so David said. We set off late summer. Sky was clear, that intense blue that almost hurts your eyes. Sun was scorching. Wildfires nearby had the air hazy, smoky. Right off the bat, the heat was brutal. Parking lot at the canyon's edge was dusty, no shade. As soon as we started down, we knew we were in for it. First day, hiking was okay. If you ignored David's constant whining about the heat and his pack. Plan was to go deep into the gorge. Find this ghost town, spend a couple nights filming, then hike out. I'd checked the weather, seemed doable for a prepared group, even though the area was bone dry. Prepared, though that was a stretch for us. I mean, I had decent boots, rope, compass, maps, the basics. But David, he was lugging a mountain of camera gear, flashy gadgets, expensive drones. None of it tested for this kind of environment. His fancy GPS crapped out by the end of day one. Digital screen cracked after a tiny fall. Satellite phone. Battery wouldn't hold a charge. Bottom line, we were heading into the largest canyon in North America with zero tech to help us. I told Liam, don't sweat it. We've got maps and a compass, old school. But I saw the worry flicker in his eyes. He was a skeptic, sure, especially about the supernatural stuff. But even he couldn't ignore the facts. Comms were down. Heat was insane, over 100 degrees. We were alone in a place of vertical cliffs and crazy winds. Hells Canyon didn't get its name for being a picnic. That first night, camp was tense. Tempers were short. We were all snapping at each other, mostly from the heat and the dust that coated everything. David, naturally, was filming everything, even our arguments. Said, conflict sells, in documentaries. Chris, behind the camera, stayed quiet, just occasionally muttering about people disappearing in these canyons. David just laughed it off. Hope we get it on camera when we see their ghosts, he jokes. Liam and I had a minor spat. Nothing serious, just nerves. He was annoyed I hadn't pushed back harder on David's, well, let's call it optimistic planning. I told him it wasn't worth it. David was paying for the whole thing. Then Liam found something in the dirt. Bickering. Forgotten. It was a small metal coin, rusty. Maybe even blood-stained. Looked old. One side said, "One soul owed." Flip side had a crudely drawn figure in a suit and hat. I'll never forget Liam's face when he held it up. Part of him was buzzing with excitement. This was exactly the kind of thing he'd been hoping for, some proof for his legends. But there was something else there too, apprehension. Like he wasn't sure if he should pocket it or chuck it as far as he could. He ended up sliding it into his pocket. Night was dead still, until it wasn't. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to this faint music. Low, scratchy jars. Sounded like it was coming off some dusty vinyl from the 30s. It drifted on the wind, fading in and out. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard Chris unzip his tent. I peeked out of mine. Chris was standing there with his camera, scanning the darkness. He whispers, "Ethan, you hear that?" I nodded. Liam crawled out next. Listened eyes wide, but didn't say anything. Music just stopped. We spent the next hour with flashlights, sweeping the blackness around camp. Nothing. Eventually, we all retreated back to our tents. Morning came. Mark just shrugged it off. Local drifters. Or your imaginations, he teased. Liam mentioned the coin, but David was more intrigued than scared. Suggested getting close, ups for the film. Spice up the story, he said. Later, we kept going down, towards that mining settlement. Day 2 was worse than day 1. Trail. Non-existent. Dust choked us. Water was getting low. Sun was a killer. Mid-afternoon. I see David gasping for air. Demands a break. Liam rolls his eyes. Even Chris shakes his head, but we can't just leave him. While David's resting, I go looking for water, shade, anything. Found what looked like an old well, part of some collapsed wood structure. Tried to see if there was water, but this rancid smell hit me. Inside was slick, red-tinged, rust. Maybe. Maybe not. Can't say for sure. Night fell, and we reached it. Cluster of scorched buildings perched near a drop-off. Ancient wood planks scattered around. Mining settlement. Must have been. Decades gone. Place just felt hostile. Like the land itself wanted us gone. Black scorch marks all over the walls. Like the whole place had burned in some crazy fire. You could taste the ash in the air. David was pumped. Perfect spot for an overnight shoot. He declares, I wanted to keep moving, find somewhere safer to camp. But we were beat. Needed rest. So we set up tents among the ruins. Biggest mistake of the trip. Around midnight, scream from Chris's tent. Bolted out, weapon in hand. Nothing. Just an empty sleeping bag. Chris. Gone. Liam and David scrambled out. David waving his flashlight around, cursing. Demanded we search. We did. Limited gear, but we searched the perimeter. No footprints. No sign of struggle. Like Chris just vanished. Found his camera on the ground, still rolling. Footage was messed up. Chris's panic breathing. Camera spinning like he was yanked backwards. then static in a voice, faint. Almost thought I imagined it. Trade me a soul, and I'll let him go. Liam's face went white. David paced, muttering about search and rescue. We reminded him, comms were dead. No GPS, no phone. Pitch black canyon, steep drops, crumbling ledges. Night rescue, suicide. Decided to wait till morning, regroup. Planned to find Chris, sleep forget about it. Tension was too thick. Around 3 a.m. footsteps. Grabbed my flashlight, peeked out. Lame, gone. Panicked. Thinking he'd vanished too. Then I saw him. Silhouette in the moonlight. Crouched by a blackened beam. Digging in the dirt with his bare hands. Liam. I hissed. What are you doing? No answer at first. Got closer. Nails broken. Fingers raw, bloody. He dug deeper. Scraping earth, knuckles hitting rock. Then he froze, turned to me. Something wrong with his eyes. Vacant. Voice distant, like a radio signal cutting in and out. He told me to dig. Cold shot through me. Gently took his shoulders. Led him back to the tents. He came easy, but kept mumbling about a deal. Back at camp, David's there, flashlight in Liam's face. What the hell is happening to him? He swore. No clue. Liam starts shaking bad. Gave him water, tried to calm him. But he just stared past us into nothing. Barely slept, muttering trade. Soul, over and over. Morning, Liam seemed clearer. Said he didn't remember digging. We searched for Chris again. Nothing. Just his clothes, folded neat outside his tent. Sickening. David. He's all about getting out of the canyon. We can come back with authorities, proper search party, he says. Wanted to find Chris now. But David had a point. We were screwed gear-wise, and Liam was freaking me out. We packed up, started climbing out. Maybe we'd run into Chris on the way. Maybe we could get signal to call for help once we got higher. Couldn't find the trail we'd come down. Every path seemed to lead us deeper or loop us back to that ghost town. Land felt twisted, like the canyon itself had shifted overnight. Sun was brutal. Couldn't go a mile or two without collapsing. Map and compass said we were heading right way, but the land just wouldn't cooperate. By midday, we were back at the burned settlement. Desperation set in. Water was critical. David was wheezing, heat stroke coming on fast. Liam just stared at the horizon, silent. We needed a plan, needed help. Help wasn't coming. That afternoon, Liam vanished again. Found him behind a building, whispering to thin air. Head jerking at weird angles, mouth twisted in this grin but dead. Took both me and David to restrain him. He fought like a wild animal, clawing, screaming in this raspy voice that wasn't his. Sometimes, I swear I heard David's voice coming out of him, or even my own. Finally subdued him, he collapsed, convulsing. Went limp. We tied his hands, gentle as we could, but scared of what he'd do. He just stared at us, hate in his eyes, that grin splitting his face. He owns me now, he whispers. Plead with him. Who owns you? What does that mean? Nothing. David pulls me aside. He's lost it, Ethan. We gotta go. I'll leave money. We'll come back with a team. Insane. You want to just leave him here? Are you crazy? He looked genuinely terrified. You saw what he did. He could have killed us. Shoved him away. It's our fault we're in this mess. I'm not leaving him. Fists clenched. For a second, I thought I might lose it. But David just stormed off, grabbed what supplies he could carry, started hiking out alone. So there we were, burned, out settlement, charred timbers, swirling dust. Liam dozing in and out. I stood guard, scanning the horizon for David, for Chris, for anything. Dusk came fast, and with it, that music. Haunting jars, drifting on the wind. Liam stirred, opened his eyes. This time they weren't vacant, they glowed. Malevolent intensity. Cold shot through me. Footsteps behind me. Spun around, flashlight on a figure at the edge of the settlement. Tall, lean, black suit, wide-brimmed hat. Eyes reflected red in my beam. Throat tightened. He removed his hat in this mocking bow. Said nothing, just stared. Then, in a voice that sounded exactly like Lam's, he whispered, "Trade me a soul, and I'll let you go." Backed away, fumbling for my weapon. Figure vanished into darkness. No sound. Liam laughed. Low, vicious chuckle that set my teeth on edge. He rose to his feet. Muscles corded in his neck arms. Superhuman strength. Grabbed rope. Tried to stop him bolting. He raked his nails across my arm, drawing blood. Smiling. "I see him," he says. Lilting tone that was and wasn't Liam's. "He's so beautiful, though." Burst of violence, tore free. Raced into the night. Shouted his name, voice echoing in the canyon. Had to chase him. Grabbed flashlight. Stumbled after his footprints in the dust. Moonlight was weak, just enough to see Liam's faint silhouette darting between buildings. Moved like lightning, weaving in and out of sight. Lungs burned, dehydrated. Couldn't push much further. Finally, caught up to him on a narrow ledge. Steep drop into the canyon. He stood swaying, arms at his sides. Beyond him, firelight. Heart-lipped, David, rescue team. No, eyes adjusted, makeshift altar. Torches, lanterns ringing it. Shapes standing around it. Recognized one by the shoulders, the stance. David, kneeling. Before him, tall figure in black. Red eyes. And next to them, God help me, Chris. Also kneeling. Face pale, drawn, starved. Tortured. Flashlight shaking in my hand. Saw David glance over his shoulder. Eyes wide with fear. Figure in black, motionless, hat in hand. Liam moaned, clutched his head. Fighting something unseen. Tried to pull him back from the ledge. Shook me off, hissing like a wild cat. Charged forward. Down a slope towards that circle of firelight. No choice. Followed, stumbling, sliding in loose gravel. Reached the edge of the circle. Stomach lurched. Chris's wrists bound with rope. Blood trickling from wounds on his arms. Hollow eyes. David unbound, but just as hopeless. Given up, tall figure turned to me. Eyes blazing red embers. "Welcome," it said. Smooth, conversational tone. "I've been waiting." Liam crumpled to his knees beside David, panting, face twisted in anguish. Figure in black placed a hand on Liam's head. Almost tenderly, Liam went limp. Then those terrible eyes locked on me. "You think you can defy evil, stand tall, fight." In that moment, every primal instinct screamed run. This was no ordinary threat. Desert dryness, swirling dust, heat amplified. Nature itself complicit. Sweat poured into my eyes, blurring vision. Figure smiled. Spoke, voice shifting. "Mimes, David's. It's simple." It breathed. "One of you can leave. Choose." Powerless, chest tight. Liam limp at its feet. David too terrified to move. Chris, battered bound, gasp. David lunged, tried to knock me off balance, dodged. His face twisted, desperation. "I'm sorry," he choked out, tears in his eyes. "I can't do this. I can't." Liam stirred, rose, shaking legs, picked up a jagged rock, eyes still burning. Before I could move, she drove it into my side. Pain, instant, blinding, vision whiting out. Heard her whisper in my ear. "He owns me now." Fell to my knees, blood soaking my shirt. Warm trickle turning to a flood. mind buzzing, fighting to stay conscious. Figure in black chuckled softly, stepped aside. Liam lurched towards me again. Froze Chris. Chris cried out, "Stop." Didn't expect that. Chris, near comatose, stared at the figure, tears streaking grime on his cheeks. I made my choice, voice cracking. "Boot, don't do this. Let him go." Figure laughed, scraping metal sound. "Choice means nothing without consequence. You belong to me." Gestured at Chris's bound wrists. "You'll serve me, or die here." Chris dropped his head, defeated. David scrambled up, eyes darting between me, Lime, and that presence. Figure beckoned David closer. David hesitated. "I can pay you," he stammered. Delirious fear. "Anything you want. Just don't kill me." Tried to bargain, like it was a business deal. Then he sank to his knees before the figure, sobbing. Figure almost looked bored. Without another word, it turned, walked away. Torches snuffed out. Gust of wind. Darkness. Near darkness. Faint moonlight. Clutched my side, trying to stop the bleeding. Liam swayed. Rock dropped from his hand. David crawled after the figure. Vanished into shadows, like it was never there. Chris lay on the ground, ragged breath. Tried to call Liam's name. He looked at me, expression horror. Momentary clarity. Dream broken. Rasping breath, collapsed. David stumbled over, shaking his shoulders. Nothing, not moving. Forced myself to crawl over. Pain searing. Liam's eyes open, lifeless, pressed ear to his chest. Still. Soul gone. David backed away, trembling. Haze of pain, tears. Chris moaned, tried to sit up, wrists still bound, half dead. Wanted to save them both, do something, barely keep my eyes open. Then voices, distant shouts, figure returning, no human. Urgent. Flashlights bobbing in distance. Search party, authorities, confusion, vision blurring. Last thing I remember, bright light in my eyes. Men in uniform shouting. Lost consciousness. Woke up in hospital days later, they said. Side bandaged, tubes in my arm. Exhausted, agent by my bed. FBI. Mumbled name too fast to catch. Detached, clinical military vibe. Wanted to know what happened. Told him everything. Tried to. Took notes. Weird looks. Deciding what was delusion. Finished. Closed notebook. Sorry for your loss, he says. Wildfire in Hell's Canyon. Official report 2 fatalities, extreme conditions, maybe animal attacks. Asked about Liam, David, Chris. Liam deceased. David missing. Presumed dead. Chris found delirious, treatment in another facility. No details, Tim. Shrug. Knew nothing more. Left. Later. Older ranger, hospital room. Hat off, respectful. Don't know what you saw. Soft voice. But people disappear in that canyon for 100 years. Every time we're told to label it a misadventure, wildfire, freak accident, heavy eyes, regret. Whatever's out there, no one wants to admit it. Left the hospital when they said I was filthy. No press about Liam's death. David missing, Chris rescued, neatly buried. Tried to contact Chris. Noah. Released, address number gone. Vanished. Secrets with him. That was last summer. Sleepless nights since. Trying to make sense. Liam's face before he died. Brief clarity in the madness. David's desperation, bargaining, leaving me to bleed. Wonder if he wandered till he found a ledge to jump. Or if something else got him. Sometimes dream of that figure. Black suit, red eyes, whispering in my own voice. Make a deal. Wake up drenched, heart pounding. People ask, why not go back? Full team, guns, cameras. Not that confident soldier anymore. Hell's Canyon changed me. Day I almost died in those ruins. realized some evils not meant to be understood or conquered lurk beneath the surface, remote places, feeding on desperate souls. So I stay away, warn people. Hell's Canyon. Cursed. Last place you want to be. Most laugh it off. Maybe they'll be fine. Maybe the legend won't choose them. But I know, something hungry in that canyon demands a soul. Me. Scar on my side. Daily reminder. Horror we found. Or it found us, can't say for sure. Just know Hell's Canyon edge. Old jazz music echoing. Coin. One soloed. Turn around. Devil's campground. He doesn't let you leave without his due. Waking up in that hospital. Days later felt like I'd been run over by a truck, then dragged through hell backwards. Side was throbbing, bandaged up tight, tubes sticking out of my arm. Just drained, completely and utterly wiped out. This agent dude standing by my bed introduces himself. FBI. Name was mumbled. Went right over my head in my half-awake fog. Had that same detached, professional vibe I remembered from the military. All business. Wanted to know what happened. So I told everything. Or at least, I tried to. Started from meeting Liam, the canyon. The music, the coin, Chris vanishing. Liam going crazy, the figure in black. Everything up to waking up surrounded by searchlights. He just scribbled in his little notebook, giving me these weird looks. Like he was trying to figure out how much of my story was just fever dreams. When I finished, he just snapped the notebook shut. "I'm sorry for your loss," was all he said. Then he gives me the official line, "Wildfire in Hell's Canyon." Report would say 2 dead from extreme environmental conditions and possible animal attacks. Clean, simple, nothing to see here. I asked about Liam. David. Chris. Agent tells me Liam's dead. David's missing, presumed dead. Chris. Found delirious. Receiving treatment at another facility. No more details. Pressed him for more. He just shrugged. Said he was in the dark. Then he just left. Like that was it. Case closed. Later, older park ranger stops by my room. Took off his hat, real respectful. "I don't know what you saw out there," he says, quiet voice. "But I do know people have been disappearing in that canyon for 100 years. And every time, we get told to label it misadventure. Wildfire, freak accident." His eyes were heavy, full of something like regret. "Whatever's out there, no one wants to admit it." That was all he said. Then he was gone too. Left the hospital once they said I was healthy enough. Healthy. Felt like I was held together with duct tape and prayers. No news coverage about Liam's death. Nothing about David being missing or Chris getting rescued. Just silence. Like it all got swept under the rug. Tried to track down Chris. Dead end. Released from the hospital, address and number were dead. Vanished. Taking whatever he knew or thought he knew with him. That was last summer. Every night since then sleepless. Trying to make sense of it. Still see Liam's face right before he died. That flash of clarity, horror, in the middle of all the crazy. Remember David's desperation, begging for his life, leaving me there to bleed out. Wonder if he just wandered around that canyon till he found a cliff to jump off. Or if something elsey claimed him. Sometimes, I dream about that tall figure. Black suit, red eyes staring. Hear it whispering in my own voice. Make a deal. Wake up soaked in sweat. Heart hammering. People ask, "Why don't you go back? Take a team. Guns, cameras. Prove what happened." They don't get it. I'm not that cocky soldier anymore. Hell's Canyon, it broke something in me. That day in those burned ruins, almost dying. That's when I realized some evils, you can't understand them. Can't conquer them. They just are, lurking under the surface of the world. Remote places, feeding on people who are desperate, lost. So I stay away, warn people off, mention Hell's Canyon. I tell them it's cursed. Last place you want to be. Most just laugh it off. Think I'm nuts. Maybe they'll be okay. Maybe the legend won't pick them. But I know, there's something hungry in that canyon. Something that wants a soul. Me, I got this scar on my side, daily reminder of the horror we found. Or that found us. Can't say for sure. Just know this. You're ever at the edge of Hell's Canyon. You hear old jazz music drifting on the wind. You find a coin that says, "One soul owed." Turn around. Just turn around and walk away. Because once you're in the devil's campground, he doesn't let you leave without paying his due. My name's Jake Foster, and back when this whole nightmare went down in Mount Hood National Forest, I was just shy of 30. I'd spent most of my 20s as a smoke jumper, battling wildfires, before I traded in the hoses for cameras and freelance gigs. Photography took me all over, wherever the work and my lens pointed. But man, I was craving some peace and quiet, just one weekend in the wilderness, you know. Me, my Siberian husky, shadow, and a whole lot of trees. Never in a million years did I expect to see some seriously messed up stuff out there. The kind that makes you question if you're losing it. It was early autumn when I drove out to Mount Hood. Sky was crystal clear, that perfect blue, and the air smelled like pine. Felt like the kind of place that could actually scrub the city burnout and a bad breakup right out of your soul. Shadow was shotgun, ears perked, letting out little excited whines every now and then. My plan was simple: find a secluded campsite, hike during the day, shoot some wildlife pics, and chill by the campfire at night. By late afternoon, I found a spot down this narrow, twisty dirt road. Wasn't an official campsite, no signs or fire pits or anything, but that was the whole point. Tall pines all around, ferns and moss thick underfoot. I got my little tent set up, unloaded some gear, and let Shadow off his leash well, onto a long lead. Anyway, once I felt like I was squared away, I started scrounging for firewood. Didn't take long before I noticed how dead silent the forest was. No birds singing, no squirrels yapping. Even the wind in the branches sounded muffled. I tried to shake it off. Wildlife gets quiet sometimes, right? Maybe it was the season. Or maybe they were just deeper in the woods. Besides, Shadow didn't seem freaked out. He was just sniffing around the edge of the clearing, more interested in rabbit trails than anything else. As dusk started to settle in, I got a small campfire going. The smell of burning pine and the crackle of the flames was actually pretty comforting as I started flipping through some photos on my camera. That's when I heard it, the crunch of footsteps. Shadow's ears shot straight up. Instinctively, I grabbed my flashlight and swung it towards the sound. A guy in a ranger uniform stepped into the beam. He gave me a friendly smile and held up his hands, like, "No worries." "Hey there," he says. "Didn't mean to spook you. I'm Ranger Dave, patrolling the area." He was maybe mid-30s, lean, with this quiet intensity in his eyes. "We've had reports of hikers going missing around here. Just checking on folks camping off trail. Everything okay?" I told him I was good, introduced myself, and said I was just out for a weekend of photography. Dave nodded, thoughtful. Mount Hood's beautiful for that, he agreed. But if you don't mind me saying, be careful. We've had some unusual disappearances lately. Stick to your camp. Keep your dog close. I told him I would. Then his radio crackled and he excused himself. Hope you find what you're looking for, he said. And then just vanished back into the shadows. Something about his warning stuck with me, though. I'd heard stories about hikers disappearing, but it was always chalked up to bad luck or injuries in the backcountry. Maybe he was just being extra cautious. That night, I doused the fire and crawled into my tent, Shadow curled up at my feet. The hush of the forest felt heavier in the dark, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the soft sigh of the wind. Sometime in the night, I dreamed I heard whispering. My own voice, calling, "Jakey, Jake," over and over. In the dream, I felt frozen, couldn't move. Then the whisper turned into this low growl. I woke up in a cold sweat. Shadow was awake too, ears pricked, body all tense. Had to be around 300 a.m. I listened. Nothing but my heart hammering in my chest. "It's okay," I whispered to Shadow, but even then, I wasn't really sure I believed it myself. Morning came, and the creeping dread from the night before felt a little further away. Sunlight was filtering through the trees, and the forest was sparkling with morning dew. Determined to shake off the weirdness, I grabbed my camera and headed out for a short hike with Shadow, following a faint game trail deeper into the woods. We walked for a couple of hours, snapping photos of mossy logs and the occasional deer tracks. I was crouched down, focusing on this cool cluster of mushrooms, when Shadow suddenly bolted forward, nearly ripped the leash right out of my hand. I managed to hang on, and he let out this series of growls. "Whoa," he said, scanning the area. No sign of anyone, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Felt like someone was watching us. I tugged Shadow back and decided it was time to head back to camp. When we got back, I saw my camp had been messed with. My backpack, which I'd zipped up tight, was open, stuff scattered around. Some things were missing: a small first aid kit, extra batteries, and one of my water bottles. At first, I thought maybe an animal had done it, but the zipper wasn't torn. Someone had opened it carefully. Then I saw the footprints in the soft ground around the tent. They were weird. Some were the size of my boots, but reversed, like someone walking backwards, or like they'd been placed there in some strange pattern. But the tread was identical to mine. I knelt down, heart pounding in my chest. That night, I kind of expected to see Ranger Dave again, but he never showed. I built up my fire, trying to push back the creeping darkness. Shadow kept staring out beyond the firelight, sometimes bristling. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder way too often. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made my pulse jump. I was dozing off by the fire when a voice whispered, "Jaker." I jolted awake, swinging my flashlight towards the sound. No one there, but Shadow was standing, hackles raised, pointing into the trees. I grabbed his leash and quietly pulled him back into the tent with me, zipping it tight. Whatever was out there, I wanted to believe it was just some animal, or a lost hiker, something normal, human. Sleep was restless. The next morning, I unzipped the tent and nearly jumped out of my skin. More footprints circling the tent. Same size as mine, and they led away from the campsite. Shadow sniffed at them and whined. That's when I decided, screw this. I wasn't going to let some weirdo ruin my trip. Stubbornness, pure and simple. I packed up camp a little more securely, took only the essentials in my day pack, and figured I'd try to follow the footprints. Didn't really think I'd actually confront whoever was making them, but I needed to know what was going on. About an hour in, I found a small clearing by a stream, and there it was, half of my missing first aid kit, ripped open and scattered. Gauze, bandages, everything just strewn around, like a kid had been rummaging through it, senseless and messy. Shadow started pulling hard on the leash, leading me further upstream, and that's when I met Mark Cole. He stepped out from behind a clump of fir trees, rifle in hand, wore this ratty jacket, and had the look of a guy who hadn't seen civilization in months. Shadow barked once, but Mark made a calming gesture. "Stop," he said, eyes darting around. "Thee don't like noise, thee?" I asked, heart still pounding from him just popping out of nowhere. "Who are you talking about?" He stayed quiet for a long time, like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then, in this low voice, he says, "If you see yourself out here, walk the other way. Don't speak, don't blink. Just run. It wants to replace you." I almost laughed, but the fear in his eyes was real. "Look, I don't know who you are, but someone's been messing with my campsite." "Was that you? Did you take my stuff?" He shook his head hard. "I've been out here for years. Know every trail, every clearing. I've heard stories, seen things. If your things were taken, it wasn't me. And it wasn't just some ordinary thief." He pointed upstream. "There's something else out here. It can look like you. It can talk like you. Just leave. Don't stay another night." I tried to get him to tell me more, but he just backed away, muttering that I'd regret ignoring him. A second later, he just melted back into the forest. The whole thing rattled me. The paranoid part of my brain wondered if he was behind everything. But the other part, the part that felt that prickle of being watched, told me something else was going on. Back at my camp, I decided I would pack up for good in the morning and head back to my car. The missing stuff, the footprints, Mark's crazy warnings, I'd seen enough weirdness for one trip. Still, I wanted just one more evening to try and get some sunset photos of the mountain. Looking back, I realize how incredibly dumb that was. Night fell fast, temperature dropping. My little campfire flickered against the tall pines. Shadow lay near my feet, ears twitching, alert. Every so often, he'd let out a soft growl. I tried to distract myself, taking photos of the night sky, but even that felt wrong. Like the darkness was too thick, swallowing the starlight. Close to midnight, I heard movement around the campsite. Soft, deliberate steps. Heart hammering in my chest, I grabbed my flashlight and a small hunting knife and crawled out of the tent. And there it was, a silhouette hunched near my fire pit. "He!" I yelled, shining the beam at the figure. It looked just like me, wearing the same style boots, same jacket, even the same hair color. My breath caught in my throat. It turned her head into the flashlight beam. I recognized my own face, my own eyes, except they were too wide, too bright, and she smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. Shadow snarled, lunging forward. In an instant, the figure scrambled backwards, but in this distorted, jerky motion, like its limbs were hinged wrong. She darted between the trees and vanished into the darkness. Shock rooted me to the spot. What the hell had I just seen? My brain was reeling. trying to label it a trick of the light, a mask, a hallucination. But it was none of those things. It was me, or something that looked exactly like me. That night, I barely slept, knife clutched in my hand, shadow pressed against my side. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke to a scream. High-pitched, anguished, echoing through the forest. I shot out of the tent. The scream stopped abruptly, replaced by this terrifying silence. I called out for Dave, for Mark, for anyone, but got nothing back. Hands trembling, I built up the fire, waiting for dawn. Every snap of a branch turned my stomach to ice. When morning finally came, I decided enough was enough. I hurriedly packed my gear, desperate to get back to my car. But then, a new problem. I couldn't find the trail back. Every path I took just looped around to a dead end, or circled back to the campsite. The forest felt wrong, like it was shifting, trying to keep me trapped inside. By midday, I was starting to panic. I decided to just make a beeline east, using the sun to guide me. Figured if I walked straight enough, I'd eventually hit a main road. About an hour into this plan, I saw something glinting in the undergrowth. Moving closer, I recognized it, a ranger's radio. Dave's. It was smeared with dried blood. My stomach lurched. Dave. I called, even though I already dreaded the answer. Then I saw him, or what was left of him. He was half hidden behind a log, lying at this awkward angle. At first, I thought he was dead, but as I got closer, he stirred, rolling onto his side. The wound on his leg looked bad, and his eyes were unfocused. I rushed over. Dave, it's Jake, hang on. I'll help. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm. His pupils were huge, almost all black. This strange calm settled over his face. Jake, he said, softly, voice too flat, too emotionless. It's easier if you don't fight. A chill ran up my spine. I tried to pull back, but his grip was like iron. Dave, you're hurt. Let me help you. He cut me off, his voice twisting, changing tone. You have to stay. Then he lunged at me, knocking me onto my back. I fought to keep the knife between us. His face was contorted, and half of it seemed to flicker, like it was shifting into a different shape, almost resembling mine. Shadow barked and leaped at him. But Dave, or whatever it was, just twisted with impossible strength, hurling the dog aside. His mouth opened in this guttural snarl, and there was nothing human left in his face. Panic gave me this surge of adrenaline. I slashed the knife across his throat. He gurgled, this wet, gasping sound. My stomach churned with revulsion. I scrambled backwards, watching Dave collapse. The color of his eyes flickered from black back to hazel again, and for a split second, he looked like the Dave I'd met. He reached up, like he was trying to grab something in the air, then just dropped, lifeless. I'd just killed a man. Or something that wore a man's face. Tears blurred my vision. I forced myself to stand, to check on Shadow. He was limping, but otherwise okay. I tried not to look at the body, tried to just focus on survival, feeling like my mind was breaking apart. I let Shadow lean against me, and we kept walking, putting as much distance as possible between us and Dave's body. Sometime that afternoon, I tripped on a hidden route and tumbled down a small embankment, twisting my ankle. My gear went flying everywhere, including my water bottle, which rolled right into a stream. Pain shot through my leg, but the bigger problem was I was losing my bearings completely. The forest felt like a maze. That evening, just as twilight fell, I stumbled into a small clearing. Exhaustion hit me like a brick. My ankle was throbbing. Then bam, sharp blow to the back of my head. Didn't even see it coming. When I came to, it was dark. My arms were tied behind me, the rope digging into my wrists. I was tied to a thick pine tree, smell of damp earth in my nostrils, and a single lantern cast this weak glow across the clearing. Shadow was gone, nowhere to be seen. Across from me, propped up against another tree, was Mark. His eyes were closed, face slack. Couldn't tell if he was even alive. And standing between us, in the lantern light, humming this messed up, off-key tune, it was me. Or the thing that looked like me. It turned, this crooked smile on its face. "You don't need to be you anymore," she said, in my own voice. The echo of it sent shivers down my spine. "They'll think you did all of this. Dave, Mark," she gestured at Mark's limp body. "All your fault, Jake." My heart was pounding. "Why are you doing this? Who are you?" The thing walked closer, her features glitching for a second, like her face was made of liquid glass. "Why?" she repeated, like she didn't quite understand the question. "Because I can. Because once I take everything from you, I can leave. I can go wherever I want." She leaned in, her eyes boring into mine. Up close, there was this flicker of something alien behind them. A darkness that made my stomach clench. Then, from the shadows, I heard a low growl. Shadow stumbled into the clearing, limping, but determined, teeth bared at the intruder. The doppelganger hissed, turning from me to Shadow. "Stay," she commanded, in my voice. Shadow's ears flattened, confused, but he kept growling. The creature reached out, with this weird tenderness, like she was going to pet him. But Shadow snapped at her hand. She recoiled, anger twisting her features into something monstrous. "Fine," she spat. "You'll be the first to go." And she raised a knife that glinted in the lantern light. Just then, Mark groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He managed to croak, "Noke," and grabbed at the doppelganger's leg, trying to pull her down. She swiveled and kicked him square in the face. I heard this sickening crack of bone, and Mark went limp again. My stomach lurched. Blood trickled from his nose and mouth. She turned back towards Shadow, who was circling, trying to find an opening. I screamed at the creature, trying to distract her. It worked. She strode towards me, raising the knife to my throat. "You don't deserve that, loyal dog," she said, leaning in close. "He'll be better off when I'm you." My mind raced. If she killed me here, she'd take my place, and no one would be the wiser. With this burst of adrenaline, I twisted my wrists in the rope, ignoring the pain. Felt the rough fibers cutting into my skin. Then, I managed to yank one hand free. Small victory, but enough. I slammed my fist upwards, the blow catching her under the jaw. She reeled back, letting out this feral snarl. Gave me just enough time to wriggle my other hand free. I lunged for her arm. We struggled, violently, both grappling for the knife. In the chaos, I glimpsed Mark's body out of the corner of my eye, slumped and still. Hot tears burned my eyes. He'd tried to help, and now he was gone. In that moment, Shadow leaped onto her back. The doppelganger shrieked as she fought him off. I grabbed the rope from the ground and wrapped it around her neck, pulling tight. She gagged, thrashing, flailing, clawing at my arms. For a split second, I thought I could actually kill her, end it. But then, the thing glitched again, her face rippling, shifting between my features and this horrid blankness. With this terrifying burst of strength, she shoved me backwards. I stumbled, cracked my head on the lantern, and everything went white. When I came to again, I was disoriented. The doppelganger was gone. Mark lay motionless, and Shadow stood guard beside me, panting, bleeding from a shallow cut on his flank. I quickly checked Mark's pulse. Nothing. He was dead. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the pounding in my skull, knowing the doppelganger could be anywhere. I grabbed the lantern and Mark's rifle, which was leaning against a nearby log, before limping away, guiding Shadow with my free hand. No idea where I was going, just that I had to keep moving. Sometime close to dawn, I ran into a group of 4 hunters. Older guys, rifles slung over their shoulders, out early for game. Relief washed over me. I must have looked insane, bloodied, limping, tear-streaked. But I begged them for help, just babbling about the creature that looked like me, about Dave and Mark, and the murders. They looked skeptical, exchanged glances. One, who introduced himself as Frank, lowered his rifle a bit. "Imam, calm down," he said. "We'll sort this out. Where are these bodies?" I tried to lead them back to the clearing, but the forest, it seemed to shift again. I couldn't find the path. Desperate, I tried to explain about the doppelganger. Most of them still seemed convinced I was in shock, hallucinating. But they followed me anyway, probably out of concern more than belief. As we were crashing through the woods, I saw a figure standing about 20 yards ahead. It wore my face, my clothes, everything. My stomach dropped. 2 of the hunters pointed their guns, clearly freaked out by the 2 identical faces. The doppelganger raised her hands, putting on this expression of pure terror. "Please," she cried in my voice, pointing right at me. "She's killed 2 people already, including a ranger. She's gone mad." One of the hunters turned to me, confused. "You she serious? You said something else was murdering people." "Not you. I'm Jake," I insisted, voice cracking. "That thing is not human." The doppelganger suddenly lunged forward, slashing at the nearest hunter with a blade. Blood sprayed across the fallen leaves. The man collapsed, clutching his throat. Horrified, the others raised their rifles, but the doppelganger darted back, leaving the man to bleed out. Then, she pointed at me, screaming, "Shoot her. She's the monster." Confusion exploded in the group. One tried to help the wounded man, who was fading fast. Another swung his rifle back and forth between me and the doppelganger, uncertain who to shoot. I tried to keep my hands visible, but I was still holding Mark's rifle. Had to look bad. "Drop your weapon," one yelled at me. I hesitated, fearing the doppelganger would attack again. Then I saw her smirk. Before I could react, she lunged at the second hunter, sinking the knife into his side. The remaining 2 spun and fired in panic. Bullets tore through branches, leaves, hitting the wrong target. One round grazed me, ripping across my shoulder. Pain was searing. I fell to the ground, dropping the rifle. Shadow barked like crazy, but I grabbed him, pulling him down, trying to shield him from stray bullets. Through blurry vision, I saw the doppelganger slash another hunter across the chest. Then she retreated into the trees, like the forest just swallowed her up. The last conscious hunter rushed to his fallen friends, cursing, calling out for help. He saw me lying there, bleeding, his face twisted with rage. "You did this," he shouted, pointing his rifle at me. "You psycho." "No," I tried to protest, but my voice was weak. My world started to spin. Adrenaline drained from my body. I tasted blood in my mouth, felt the warm trickle from my shoulder wound. The man advanced, tears in his eyes from seeing his friends dying. His hands were shaking. He was about to pull the trigger when, out of nowhere, black SUVs barreled through the underbrush. Men in dark suits and bulletproof vests jumped out, ordering everyone to lower their weapons. The hunter stammered something about a monster, but the men ignored him. One seized the hunter's gun. Another pinned me to the ground, pressing a knee into my back. Shadow snarled, but a third man forced a muzzle loop over his snout and pinned him too. I heard radio chatter, cold and professional. A voice said, "Multiple casualties. Secure the scene. Collect the bodies. We debrief in the vehicle." A man in a black suit grabbed the back of my head, looked into my eyes. He said quietly, "You saw a bear attack. You have no memory of anything else." His tone was flat, emotionless, authoritative. I tried to speak, to warn them about the creature, but the man just shook his head. Another agent injected something into my arm, and the world began to dim. Through the haze, I glimpsed the doppelganger emerging from the trees, stepping right up to another agent. She gave him this small, satisfied smile. He didn't even flinch, didn't question why there were two identical women. Instead, he opened the door to one of the SUVs, and she climbed in. My vision blurred completely, felt my mind slipping away as strong hands dragged me into a second SUV. Last thing I remember was the look on Shadow's face, this mixture of fear and confusion as we were separated. I don't know how long I was out. Just know I woke up in this cold, sterile room. Could have been a hospital, could have been a lab. Shoulder was bandaged, IV in my arm. A doctor in a white coat stood over me, flanked by men in black suits. "Don't worry," the doctor said. "You're in good hands. Your memory of these events might be patchy." I tried to sit up, to demand answers, but I was too weak. My whole body felt drugged. One of the suits jotted notes on a clipboard. The doctor turned to him, said, "We'll keep her under observation for as long as necessary." I closed my eyes, swallowing the terror that threatened to drown me. The doppelganger had succeeded in taking my place, or at least, that's what it seemed like. And these men, whoever they were, had orchestrated a cover, up so well practiced, I was sure they'd done this before. As I drifted between delirium and consciousness, I wondered how many others had seen their own faces in the dark. How many had been replaced? How many stories had been sanitized as bear attacks or missing hikers? All I knew was that the forest held a predator beyond anything I could comprehend. And it wore my face. To this day, I don't know if I'm a prisoner or a patient. They keep telling me I need time to recover before my release. But I fear that walking free outside these walls isn't me at all. And Shadow God, I hope my dog realized something was wrong. I've written this account in the margins of a notebook they gave me to journal in. I doubt anyone will ever read it. And if they do, they'll just dismiss it as the ramblings of a traumatized mind. But it's the truth. In Mount Hood National Forest, something took my face and left me with nothing but nightmares. And the scariest part is, I don't think it's done. Not by a long shot. My name's Alex Turner, and I'm 26. This whole crazy thing happened just over a year ago, way out in the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. We were at this abandoned fire lookout called Devil's Peak. I'm telling you about it now, because the nightmares are still messing with me, and I just need someone, anyone, to know what really went down out there. So, I'd been going out with Chris Miller for almost a year when he gets this idea in his head about taking a week off the grid. Chris was an engineer, super logical, didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. Ghosts, monsters, he thought that was all BS. Human nature, that was the real danger, according to him. Normally, I'd have agreed, but after what I experienced, man, I don't know what to believe anymore. Our buddies, Dave Johnson and Sarah Davis, came along with us. Dave, he was 30, Chris's best friend since high school. Always laughing in the face of danger, but also loved a good conspiracy theory for kicks. Sarah, 24, was Dave's new girlfriend. Sweet girl, kinda spiritual, always reading about crystals and tarot cards. She'd just been diagnosed with epilepsy, which made her a bit nervous about getting too far from hospitals and stuff. But Dave talked her into it, said fresh air would do her good. When we told people we were heading to Devil's Peak, this run, down Fire Lookout, some people just gave us weird looks. But this one old dude at the gas station, flannel shirt, the whole 9 yards. He went pale when I mentioned the name. Wouldn't even look me in the eye. "Y'all shouldn't be messing around up there," he says, voice all low and creepy. That place was abandoned for a reason. Chris just gave him a polite smile, thanked him, and we drove off. Typical Chris, didn't buy into curses or haunted houses. He liked to be in control, solve everything with logic, me. I wasn't so sure. But I didn't want to kill everyone's vibe. It was a 4-hour drive on these twisty, narrow roads, plus a 2-mile hike lugging all our gear to get to the lookout. Then we pushed through this thick patch of pines, and bam, there it was, the tower. Tall wooden thing, perched right on this rocky overlook. Paint was peeling. Steps looked like they'd give way any minute, but it was still standing there, all proud against the orange sky. I'd done a little digging beforehand and found this messed up story about the place. Apparently, some forest ranger stationed there had lost his mind one summer. Rumor was, he started hearing voices, seeing things in the trees. Weeks of acting weird, then he sets the whole place on fire with himself inside. Everyone said it was an accident, official report and all. But I'd read some old newspaper clippings. This guy's last days were anything but normal. We climbed these creaky stairs, dumped our bags on the small platform, you know, the cabin part at the top. Dusty as hell, single cot, busted up furniture. Trapdoor in the floor in the middle, probably to a storage space underneath. Windows were cracked, but mostly still there. We just stood there for a minute, taking in the smell, musty wood, and something else, like burnt metal. Smells like a burnt electrical system. Chris says, all practical. Probably from an old lightning strike. I'll check it out later. Sarah was hovering by the doorway, looking seriously uneasy. Guys, do you feel that? Dave rolls his eyes. Feel what? Spooky ghost vibes. He nudges Chris. Chris just smirks. I tried to lighten things up. Let's get some air in here. It's definitely stale. We propped a window open. I looked out at the view, just miles and miles of forest. Mount Hood peaks up to the north. My eyes kept going back to the tree line below, trying to shake this weird feeling like someone, or something, was watching. We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, setting up sleeping bags, and poking around in the old storage area. I found this pile of mildwood ranger logs stashed behind the cot. Mostly boring stuff about the weather, little fires here and there. But then I'm flipping through, and my pulse starts to pick up. The handwriting gets all shaky around mid-July in some year they didn't even name. No one believes meet. I see them at night, calling my name. Next shift can't come soon enough, but if I leave it will follow. And finally, if I leave I burn, if I stay I rot, it won't let me go. I read it like 3 times, then tucked the logs away. Sun was going down, and I didn't need to freak myself out more. That evening, we lit a lantern and tried to get comfortable in that one-room tower. Sarah cooked up some canned soup on this tiny propane stove, and Dave cracked open a cooler of beers. Mood got a little better for a bit. We were just chatting about random stuff, how Dave and Sarah met at a music festival, Chris's crazy ideas for making fire watchtowers more efficient, my photography portfolio. But then, of course, the conversation drifts to the local ghost stories. So, Alex. Dave starts, grinning like he's about to stir up trouble. You've been quiet about this place's history. Anything you want to share? I glance at Sarah, who already looked jumpy as hell. Maybe it's better if we don't talk about it tonight, huh? It's just stories. Sarah frowns. No, actually, I'd like to know. That old guy at the gas station seemed genuinely freaked out. Chris just waves it off. Some ranger lost his mind. Tragic story. But that's it. This place is ancient. Who knows what was going on with him psychologically? My stomach kinda twisted. He apparently set the tower on fire with himself in it. Silence drops like a rock. Dave clicks his tongue, trying to sound cheerful. Okay, that's enough ghost talk for one night. None of us felt like drinking after that, so we just called it a night early. Chris and I sat up side by side in our sleeping bags, Dave and Sarah in a corner. I dozed off listening to the wind outside and the crickets buzzing away. Close to midnight, I jolt awake to Sarah screaming. I scramble out of my bag, see her sitting bolt upright, eyes wide open, scared stiff. Dave fumbles for the lantern, switches it on, and the small room floods with this harsh yellow light. Sarah, hey. Dave kneels down beside her, shaking her gently. You okay? Did you have a seizure? She's trembling all over. I saw something. Someone. Right outside that window. Chris rubs his face. Still half asleep. It's pitch black out there. You probably just saw the reflection of the lantern or something. Sarah's voice is shaking bad. No, it was tall. And it had these glowing eyes. Dave pulls her into a hug. It's all right, you're safe. There's nobody out there. But she just wouldn't calm down. I look over at the window. Nothing. No footprints on the little balcony outside, no shadow in the glass. Eventually, Sarah lays back down, still breathing hard, and Dave stays awake, just stroking her hair until she finally falls asleep again. I managed to drift off, but my mind just kept replaying Sarah's panic. She was genuinely terrified. You can't fake that kind of fear. But there wasn't anything I could do about it then, so I just let exhaustion take over. Next morning, I find Chris squatting by our radio gear, looking pissed. Deep scowl on his face. What's wrong? I ask. He points at the radio. Dead as a doornail. Battery was full yesterday, now it's completely drained, and my phone died overnight too. Dave walks over, phone in hand, shaking his head. Mine's not powering on either. Thing was at 80% before we crashed. Think that storm last night messed with the electronics. I frown. There was no storm, just wind and maybe a little drizzle. Chris purses his lips. We can still hike back down, get help if we need it. But it's a long hike. I'm not planning on leaving early just because of a glitch. I'll figure it out. We spent most of the day hiking around the tower, taking pictures, gathering firewood. Chris messed with the radio, but no luck. Dave made jokes about UFs sucking our batteries dry. Sarah just walked quietly, sticking close to my side. Around lunchtime, we stopped on this rocky spot to eat. Dave says something dumb about forest ghosts again, and Chris just loses it. Oh, enough with that crap, Dave. Chris snaps. We're here to have a good time, not feed into your conspiracy nonsense. Dave bristles. Chill out, man. I'm just messing around. Don't be so sensitive. They start bickering back and forth, tension in the air you could cut with a knife. Eventually, Sarah and I managed to get them to drop it, but Chris was in a foul mood the rest of the day. That night, we sat around this little campfire we'd built near the tower. Dave was restless, tapping his foot against a log. We decided to roast marshmallows, hoping to lighten the mood. Sarah's holding a marshmallow over the flames, eyes all distant. It feels so quiet, she whispers. Too quiet. I look around, she's right. No birds, no crickets, no rustling leaves. Just this heavy silence, only broken by the fire crackling. Dave clears his throat, obviously uncomfortable. You know, maybe we should head back tomorrow. Let's not make it a whole week. Sarah, I don't want you stressing about your condition. Before Sarah can even answer, Chris scoffs. We came all this way, lugged all this gear up here, and for what? To turn around because of some silly noises or quiet nights. His voice is louder than it needs to be, and I can hear the anger underneath. He seemed defensive, like he was personally insulted by the idea of leaving. Dave locks eyes with Chris. It's not just silly noises. Man, Sarah's seeing stuff. The electronics are dead. Something feels off here. Sen leave. Chris snaps. Go back on your own if you're so scared. I'm staying. Dave stands up, fists clenched. Don't be a jerk, Chris. Chris stands too, stepping forward. Second, I thought they were actually gonna fight. I jump up, get between them. Guys, calm down. We can figure this out in the morning. Dave glares at Chris. I'm out then. He stomps off towards the trees. I figured he just needed to cool off, would be back in a few minutes. Chris mutters something under his breath. Sarah's just staring at the ground, looking pale and freaked out. I sigh, motion for everyone to head back up to the tower. 10 minutes pass, then 20, then a whole hour. Dave still hasn't come back. Worry starts to creep in. Dave might be impulsive, but he wasn't stupid. He wouldn't just wander off into the woods at night without a flashlight or a plan. Eventually, Chris grudgingly agrees we should go look for him. The three of us grab our flashlights, only one of them is still working, and head into the woods, calling Dave's name. We split up. Kind of a triangle formation, staying in sight of each other. After about half an hour, I spot something reflecting in the underbrush. Dave's flashlight, handle smeared with dark stains. My heart hammers in my chest. Sarah and Chris rush over. Is that? Sarah's voice trembles. I crouch down, pick it up real careful. It's his. And this looks like blood. A few feet away, I see the cracked screen of Dave's phone. I kneel, touch it. sticky and damp. More blood. Okay, Chris says, swallowing hard. We'll keep looking. We searched until dawn, calling his name over and over. Nothing. No answer. No footprints, no sign of him. It was like he'd just vanished. Back at the tower, Sarah just collapses onto the cot, bursts into tears. We have to get help, she pleads. We have to go to the nearest ranger station. Chris rubs his eyes, exhausted. It's a good 8 hours back down, and who knows if Dave's somewhere nearby, injured. We can't just leave him out here. Sarah's sobs turn into this shaky kind of rage. We can't stay here. We have no radio, no phones. This place is a nightmare. As the sun comes up, we make a quick plan. Me and Chris, we'd score the area around the tower again. Look for any sign of Dave. Sarah would stay at the tower just in case he somehow made it back. If we found nothing by midday, we'd all head out together. Before we left, I noticed Sarah was shivering, even though it wasn't that cold. I put a hand on her forehead, but she didn't feel like she had a fever. She waves me off, says she's fine, but her eyes are all distant. Chris and I spent hours circling the lookout, checking ravines, calling Dave's name. Nothing. When we got back, Sarah was curled up on the floor, trembling like crazy. For a second, I thought she was having a seizure. I rushed to her side, but what I saw was way worse. Her eyes had rolled back, and she's whispering in this low, unnatural voice. Sounded like it was coming from way down in her throat. He is watching, waiting, he's so hungry. Sarah. I shake her. Sarah, it's Alex, snap out of it. Her eyes snap back into focus, and she lets out this sharp cry. Blood's trickling from her mouth, where she'd bitten her lip. Her arms are covered in deep scratches, like she'd clawed herself during whatever that seizure-like thing was. What the hell was that? Chris asks, stepping back, face white as a sheet. Sarah looks at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, I felt something. Like a presence inside me. She's shaking uncontrollably, and I feel completely helpless. We try to calm her down, give her water. Chris is rattled, but his stubbornness is still there. We should go now. We quickly pack up our stuff. I glance at the sky. Clouds are rolling in, thick and dark. Didn't want to get caught in the rain hiking down. As we're packing, Chris starts pacing, muttering to himself. Sounded almost like he was having a whispered conversation with someone or something. Chris. I touch his arm gently. He jerks away, eyes all wild. Don't sneak up on me, he hisses, then blinks like he's confused, shaking his head. Sorry, man, just stressed. We hear thunder rumble in the distance. Sarah shudders, almost collapses, so I help her sit down in a corner. Chris walks over to the trapdoor in the floor, starts rummaging around for more supplies. His shadow disappears into the dark space below. Minutes pass, then 20. Chris doesn't come back up. Chris, I call. No answer. Chris, we need to get going. Still nothing. I help Sarah to her feet, and we both go down those rickety stairs into the cramped storage area. Pitch black down there. Had to use the flashlight to see. Chris is there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, small hunting knife in his hand. Shirt's off, and he's carving something into his chest. Oh my God, Chris. I lunge forward, trying to grab the knife, but he just snarls at me. Like an actual animal snarl, made my blood run cold. Sarah whimpers behind me. Chris glares at her, then at me like we're intruders. The symbol on his chest, it's this weird shape, almost like a twisted infinity sign, all jagged edges. What are you doing? I plead, voice shaking. He blinks, seems to snap back for a second. I don't know, Alex. His eyes dart between Sarah and me. Then he clutches his head like he's in agony. We can't leave, he says, voice strained. He won't let us. Somehow, we managed to haul Chris back upstairs. Weather had gone full on crazy. Rain was pounding the tin roof, thunder rattling the windows. Sun was almost gone, dipping below the trees. Hiking down those mountain trails in a storm like this, with Chris and Sarah both freaking out, felt impossible. I tried to keep it together, rummaging for dry blankets, extra lanterns, anything to distract us. But Christ, something had really taken hold of him. He'd flip between moments where he seemed almost normal, then slip back into this vicious mumbling. Sometimes he'd just stare at Sarah, who was half asleep and shivering, and mutter about sacrifice. I should have just demanded we leave, storm or no storm. But I was terrified, stuck. Hiking out at night in this mess was dangerous, but staying felt like we were just sinking deeper into some nightmare. Sometime close to midnight, I must have dozed off, just from pure exhaustion and fear. When I woke up, the lantern was out. Only light was from the lightning flashing outside. Sarah was gone. Chris was gone. My heart went into overdrive. Sarah, I yelled, scrambling to my feet. Chris, no answer. Rain was still hammering the tower. I found my flashlight, flicked it on, scanned the room. Trapdoor was open again. Took a deep breath and went down those shaky stairs. Legs were trembling so bad. I nearly dropped the flashlight when I saw them. Sarah and Chris were both in the storage space, and they weren't alone. Dave was there too, except he was tied to a rafter, hanging limp. Blood was dripping from his forehead. I just stared, shocked. How the hell was Dave here? Alive, after disappearing days ago. Chris was holding a rope, tying Sarah's hands behind her back. She was whimpering, begging him to stop. Dave looked half conscious, just moaning softly. Chris, my voice cracked. What are you doing? He turned to me, face twisted. Not Chris anymore. This thing in him, it was a mix of triumph and desperation. He said it, in Chris's voice, but not. We need a sacrifice, Chris muttered, eyes wide and crazy. We can't leave until it's done. My pulse was hammering so loud I could barely hear myself think. Who said that, Chris? Snap out of it. Instead of answering, he lunged at me. I stumbled back, slammed my head against the wall. Stars exploded in my vision. Next thing I knew, my wrists and ankles were tied up, and Chris was laughing softly. Not Chris's laugh. This cold, creepy sound that didn't belong to him. He's in me, Chris whispered. Or maybe it was the demon. Whatever presence was in his voice, deeper, older. We tried to leave, but we can't. You don't understand. Sarah was sobbing, struggling against the ropes. Please, Chris, please let me go. Dave was still hanging there, either passed out or too weak to move. Cuts and bruises all over his arms. My stomach twisted looking at him. How had Chris done this? When did he even find Dave? And how was Dave still alive? Chris, or the thing controlling him, moved real slow to this little camping stove. Lit it. Orange glow flickered on that carved symbol on his chest, all crusted with dried blood. He picked up a metal poker we'd used for the fire earlier, held it over the flame. Amber's screams got louder. My heart was pounding in my ears, couldn't breathe, thinking about what he was gonna do. Didn't take long for that poker to glow red hot. Chris walked over to Sarah, pressed it against her palm. Her shriek echoed in that tiny space, smell of burnt flesh filling the air. I gagged, tears streaming down my face. I thrashed against my ropes, trying to get free, but Chris was too strong. And that demon thing, it made him stronger, more relentless. He moved to me next, poker still glowing, held it up. Offer a sacrifice, he demanded, in that terrible, layered voice. Or burn. In that moment, adrenaline just flooded me. Clenched my jaw, forced myself not to show fear. Please, I begged, trying to sound different, trying to trick him. I'll do whatever you want. Just let me go. I'll help you. Chris paused. Flicker of the real Chris in his eyes for a split second. Slowly, he lowered the poker. You'll help me. Yes, I lied, even though I had no clue what I was promising. Me. Let me prove it. Sarah was staring at me through her tears, like she was warning me not to say anything. But we were out of time. Dave looked like he was barely hanging on. I had to do something. Chris cut the ropes. He cut the ropes on my wrists, knife just grazing my skin. Hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stand up calm. Ankles were still tied, but I thought maybe I could work them free. I took a slow step forward. He watched me close, that demon thing still glinting in his eyes. My mind was racing, searching for anything, a weapon, an opening. Then I saw it, a lantern on a shelf behind him. If I could knock it over, cause a distraction. Heart pounding, I lunged. Grabbed the lantern, swung it right into Chris's face. He screamed, staggered back. Glass shattered, fire burst out on the floor. Sarah, run, I yelled. Fire was spreading fast, hungry for the dry wood. All junk. Smoke was billowing up. Sarah's wrists were still tied, and Dave was hanging there, limp. My fingers fumbled. Tears stinging my eyes, heat getting worse fast. Piece of burning wood fell from the ceiling, landed in Sarah's hair. She screamed, thrashing. I grabbed her, swatted at the flames. Chris roared behind me, furious, but I couldn't see him through the smoke. Lungs burning. I cut Sarah free, she just clung to me, sobbing. When I turned to Dave, flames had already swallowed the rafter above him. I reached for him, but suddenly, the whole thing just collapsed, burning wood crashing down. He locked eyes with me for one awful second, then the rafter gave way, sending sparks and debris everywhere. Sarah screamed his name, but there was nothing I could do. Fire was between us, storage area turning into a furnace. I grabbed Sarah, pulled her towards the trapdoor ladder. Chris was somewhere behind us, screaming in this voice that was half human, half something else. Flames roared up, taking the rest of the tower. Outside, the storm was still raging, rain coming down in sheets. Fire was surging, like it was alive, unstoppable even in the downpour. Like it was being fed by something unholy. We stumbled away from the tower, coughing, sobbing, falling onto the wet ground. Deva, Sarah whimpered, just staring at the inferno. I gripped her hand, heart shattered. No way anyone could survive that. Then, this figure staggers out of the tower entrance. Chris. Flames were dancing on his clothes, hair singed. He looked right at me. Even from far away, I could see it, no trace of the Chris I knew. Then the tower gave this final groan, collapsed, throwing sparks into the storm. Chris just vanished behind the smoke and flames. I don't remember much about getting out of the forest. We just wandered for hours, soaked to the bone, traumatized, until we stumbled onto some dirt road, flagged down a truck. Driver took us to a tiny ranger station. I told the rangers what happened. Dave was dead. Chris had gone insane. We barely escaped the fire. They looked at us like we were crazy. Local sheriff showed up, then the FBI, for a missing person case. They questioned me for hours, making me go over every detail. Sarah was taken to a hospital, burns. Slipped into a coma, I heard. Never woke up. Died a few weeks later. Official story was complications from burns and seizures. When I asked about the tower, about Chris's body, FBI agents just gave me blank stares. One said, "We're still investigating," then changed the subject. Heard two agents talking outside my hospital room, voices low. One said something about similar cases in other remote areas. None of this can go public. My heart just sank. They were covering it up. Never saw Dave's body. Never heard anything more about Chris. Local news said, tragic fire at an abandoned lookout, accidental blaze. Mentioned my name once, but no details about what really happened. Tried to move on. Nightmares, guilt, losing 3 people I cared about. Couldn't stop seeing those last moments. Firelight on Dave's face. That voice in Chris's throat. Sarah's screams. 2 months later, phone rings late at night. Blocked number. I answer, half asleep, thinking it's a wrong number. Just breathing on the other end, static crackling. Then a voice. Voice I knew, voice I used to love, 2 words. I see you. And that's it. That's all I can bring myself to tell you. All I know is, Devil's Peak is empty again. Blackened skeleton on a lonely ridge. They'll probably tear it down soon. Or maybe they'll rebuild it. And maybe, in some dark corner of those silent woods, Chris still walks. Or whatever was inside him does. I'm 26 years old, and I don't sleep much anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see that symbol carved into my boyfriend's chest. And I wonder if it's carving itself into my mind too. If you're reading this, please believe me, some places should be left alone. Because there are horrors out there, real and hungry, waiting for anyone dumb enough to wander in. My name's Jake Hunter. I'm 35 years old. This whole crazy thing went down last fall, way up in the Wallowa Mountains in northeastern Oregon. I had this idea, that I could just ditch everything, live off the grid. You know, leave all the crap from my past behind. Man, was I wrong about that. Back in the day, I used to be a survival instructor. Taught these weekend warrior types how to handle themselves in the backcountry, what to do in an emergency. But honestly, it never really felt right, you know. Especially not after my brother Kyle disappeared in those same damn mountains. He was only 28 when he just vanished. Poof. Officially, he was just another missing hiker. Unofficially, I always felt like there was something darker going on, something I just couldn't put my finger on. So, about a year back, I sold everything I owned, packed my truck with supplies, and drove straight into the Wallows. My only buddy was Gus, my black German shepherd. Gus had been with me since he was a pup. Trained him myself, good at sniffing out game, keeping predators away, and staying cool as a cucumber under pressure. Figured with him by my side and my know-how, I'd be alright, safe enough out there. I built myself this little cabin, real secluded spot near a creek. Crude thing, mostly logs I'd cut myself. Single window, Simple wood stove, cot, no electricity, no running water, the works. Hunted deer, trapped smaller animals, fished in the creek. Hard living, for sure. But it felt honest. Like the weight of the world was finally lifting off my shoulders. For the first few months, I actually thought I was free. Finally. But then, things took a real left turn. My old friend Mike Davis showed up out of nowhere. Mike's 40, ex-military. We used to be tight, back before Kyle went missing. He said he just wanted to check up on me. Tracked me down through some old survival forum, found out where I'd gone, and just decided to pay a visit. Grateful for the company at first. Had no clue what he was really up to. Right away, I could tell Mike was on edge. Looked thinner than I remembered. Dark circles under his eyes. Said he'd driven all the way up from California, was between jobs. Didn't push him for details. We did the rough handshake thing. Then Gus barked at him. Not a friendly bark, no tail wagging, no sniffing. Should have been my first red flag, you know. Gus never growled at people he knew. Still, we settled in. I cooked up a stew, venison, and wild onions. We caught up around the wood stove. Mike tried to act all casual, telling me stories from his army days, places he'd been stationed overseas. But he kept steering the conversation back to Kyle's disappearance. Wanted to know if I'd found any clues out here. Anything about what really happened. Asked about rumors I might have heard, old legends. Heard plenty of stories. I shrugged, playing it down. People around here talk about Bigfoot sightings, ghosts of lost miners, even skinwalker-type legends. None of it's gonna help find Kyle, though. Mike's eyes flickered in the firelight. You sure there's nothing else out here? Something more dangerous than animals or the cold? I stared at him, confused. Of course, the mountains are dangerous, Mike. You know that. Terrain can kill you quick. Plus, cougars, wolves, you name it. He opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. We just dropped it. That night, I woke up to Gus's low growl. He was pacing near the door, sniffing at the crack underneath it. Wind was shrieking outside, rattling the cabin walls. I grabbed my rifle, old bolt action, I kept for protection, and stepped out with Gus right behind me. My breath fogged in the moonlight. Everything was silver and black. Then I heard it, a long keening wail. Didn't sound like any animal I knew. Echoed through the pines. Made the hair on my arms stand up. Gus whimpered, pressed right up against my leg. First time in all our years together. He seemed genuinely scared. I stayed out there for a few minutes, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. When I went back inside, Mike was wide awake, sitting on the edge of his cot. Didn't ask what the noise was, just stared at me like he already knew. Next morning, we went out to hunt. Plan was to track deer, maybe bag one for meat. But the forest just felt wrong. Birds were silent, ground smelled like decay. After an hour of hiking, we found it. A half-eaten deer carcass, ribs exposed, legs twisted all weird. Kill was fresh, but the way it was torn apart didn't look like a cougar or a wolf. Almost surgical in some places, brutally savage in others. Mike frowned, looking down at it. This isn't normal, he muttered. We moved on, both of us pretty shaken. About a mile from there, we stumbled across something even worse. A man, barely alive, propped up against a tree. Clothes shredded, skin slashed to ribbons. I rushed over to him, tried to stop the bleeding, but it was bad. Real bad. He was delirious, Eyes rolling back in his head, Mike knelt down beside me. The man stared up at us, wild terror in his eyes. Grasped at my shirt, whispered, "Wendigo." His voice just faded out as he died. Wendigo. I shivered at the word. Heard it once before. Some old story about an evil spirit that drove people to cannibalism in the dead of winter. But it wasn't the dead of winter. And the man's injuries looked like an animal attack, or worse. We carried the body back to the cabin, hoping to bury him properly. By the time we got there, it was almost dark. I dug a shallow grave. As I worked, Mike just hovered, trembling. Finally, he just burst out, "We've got to leave. You and me. Tomorrow." I asked him why. He just kept saying, "This place, if there's something out here, Jake. Something beyond what we know." "You talking about the Wendigo?" "That's just a myth, Mike." I shot back, even though the image of that half-eaten deer and the dying man was making me question my own words. That night, a storm rolled in. Harsh, unrelenting wind and rain just battered the cabin. Lightning flashing way off in the distance. Our radio crackled, then just died. Short-circuited by the damp, I guess. Tried to fix it, but the wiring was fried. And wouldn't you know it, my old rifle jammed up when I tried to clean and reload it. Metal burr in the chamber, stuck fast. Gus was pacing and whining every time thunder clapped. Felt like the whole world was closing in on us. Morning didn't bring any relief. Storm was still raging. Mike was even more insistent we pack up and start heading down the mountain. Argued with him. Told him traveling in this weather was suicide. Creek was already swollen. Trails would be muddy quagmires. But Mike was having none of it. Better to risk a broken leg than stay here another night. He snapped, all wired up. Still, we couldn't leave. Storm was just too damn dangerous. So we waited, anxious, cooped up in that tiny cabin. That's when Mike finally spilled the beans. Told me the real reason he'd come. He knew something about my brother's disappearance. Knew Kyle hadn't been alone. There'd been others. Disappearances that were never reported, or just quietly swept under the rug. And Mike knew they'd all gone missing in the same general area. Wouldn't say how he knew. Just that he'd done work for some group in the government. Testing survival capabilities. Something about an experiment. My blood ran cold at those words. "Are you telling me Kyle was part of some experiment?" I demanded, voice tight. "Is that why he's gone?" Mike's face went eshy. "I never wanted him hurt, Jake. I didn't think it would go that far." His eyes flicked over to the cabin door, like he was expecting someone or something to walk in. But something else got him. Not us. Something in these mountains. Anger and confusion just boiled up inside me. I grabbed Mike by the collar, yanked him close. He didn't fight back, just let me shake him. "You brought him here." I growled, voice low and dangerous. "You lured my brother to his death. It wasn't supposed to be that way." Mike insisted, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Jake." I shoved him away, heart pounding, mind spinning with betrayal and grief. Before I could say another word, Gus let out this nasty snore, fixed on the door. A moment later, a thunderous crash shook the cabin. Something or someone was outside. Claws scraping wood, a raspy moan that turned my stomach inside out. Peered through a crack in the logs. Saw a dark silhouette stalking around the cabin. Reached for the rifle, still jammed solid. Mike grabbed a hatchet from the table. "If it gets in, he said, voice trembling. We fight. We just stood there, holding our breath, listening to the scraping. Then silence. For a split second, I thought maybe it was gone. Suddenly, it slammed against the door with unbelievable force. Hinges groaned. Gus barked like crazy, but he was clearly terrified. I ran to brace the door, Mike hovering behind me with the hatchet. Whatever was out there was strong. Damn strong. Wooden door cracked. Feared it was gonna shatter any second. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. Heard heavy footsteps receding into the storm. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No sign of it coming back. Couldn't see where it had gone in the darkness. By dawn, the storm finally broke. We were exhausted, but adrenaline kept us moving. Radio dead, rifle useless, door practically splintered. I agreed we had to leave. Packed what little food we had left, a couple of knives, and that jammed rifle, hoping I could fix it if we found better tools somewhere. Gus stayed glued to my side, tail tucked low. Plan was to head to the nearest ranger station. Knew there was one about 14 miles away. Felt like 100. Trail was muddy, terrain in the Wallace is punishing even on a good day. Plus, we had to keep looking over our shoulders for that thing. Hiked carefully along the creek, which had swollen into a small river. After a few miles, we picked up a faint trail. That's when I heard a voice, calling for help. Mike and I froze. Sounded like a woman. Pushed through the underbrush, found ourselves in a small clearing, and there she was, figure lying face down. Hurried forward, telling Mike to cover me, knelt down beside her. Yeah, a woman, badly injured, instincts screamed, trap. But her clothes were torn, and she was whimpering in pain. Her name was Linda, hiker, separated from her friends days ago. Ankle was twisted all kinds of wrong, probably broken. Told Mike we couldn't just leave her. He looked unnerved, glancing around like he expected something to jump out from behind the trees. Help me carry her, I ordered. Linda cried out in pain as we lifted her. Fashioned a makeshift stretcher with branches and my sleeping roll. Gus walked point, nose to the ground, occasionally glancing back at us. Grueling hour later, we heard a shout from up the trail. Tall, broad-shouldered guy in a ranger uniform appeared. Ranger Colton Reed. Face was worn, eyes grim. Looked relieved when he saw Linda. Colton quickly took charge, helped us carry Linda to a small ranger outpost a short distance away. Never thought I'd see her alive, he muttered, shaking his head. Outpost was cramped, smelled of damp wood. Linda drifted in and out of consciousness as Colton splinted her ankle, started an IV from his medical kit. I tried to work on my rifle jam with his tools, but that metal burr was lodged in there good. Once Linda was stabilized, Colton pulled me aside. Mike was near the door, keeping watch. Been hearing strange reports, Colton said, voice low. People disappearing. Bodies found torn to pieces. Locals talk about a Wendigo. His expression was unreadable. Don't buy into myths easily. But I've seen tracks that aren't from any normal creature. Colton's radio crackled. He fiddled with it. But the storm damage had knocked out the local towers. Told us there was a bigger ranger's station about 10 miles north. Had a vehicle there. Could get Linda to a hospital from there. We'll travel together, he said. Safety in numbers. So, we set off. Me, Mike, Colton, Gus, and unconscious Linda on the stretcher. Forest was eerily silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing but the wind in the pines. Colton took the lead. I followed with Gus. Mike brought up the rear, carrying one end of the stretcher. Progress was painfully slow. After a couple of hours, we needed to rest. Found a relatively dry spot under a rocky overhang. That's when Mike started acting weird again. Pacing, eyes darting around, hand constantly on that hatchet. I confronted him. "What's with you? You seem more scared than any of us." He barked out a laugh, sounded almost hysterical. "Scared? Of course, I'm scared, Jake. You have no idea what we're dealing with." Colton stepped in, voice firm. "I know enough. Wendigo is said to be an evil spirit. Thrives on human desperation, on our hunger and greed." He shot Mike a hard look. "I've seen my share of bodies, Mike. This might be something unnatural." Mike just shook his head, eyes wide and frantic. "Not might be, Colton. It is." He looked at me and then he said it. "It took your brother." Rage just flared up inside me, but then Gus suddenly growled, hackles raised, staring right at Mike. Didn't understand it. Mike hadn't done anything aggressive that moment, but Gus was reacting like he was ready to tear him apart. I pulled Gus back, confused. Mike just seemed different. Face gaunt, eyes hollow. We decided to move on. Daylight was precious, wanted to cover as many miles as possible. As we trudged along, clouds thickened again. Rain started to fall in cold sheets. Temperature dropped, my hands went numb against the stretcher poles. Gus whined, pressing against my leg for warmth. Another 2 hours, night closing in fast. Colton suggested we find shelter. Spotted a small, dilapidated cabin by the edge of a rocky bluff. Looked deserted. Got inside, set Linda down, gathered wood for a fire. Cabin had broken windows, sagging roof, but it was better than sleeping out in the storm. As darkness fell, wind moaned through the cracks in the walls. We sat around the fire, just listening to each other breathe. Linda stirred occasionally, groaning in pain. Colton fed her some water, a couple of painkillers. Tried to rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard that wailing noise from the night before. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a strangled cry. Shot up, fumbling for my knife. Mike was standing by the fire. Colton was on the ground, blood streaming from a gash in his shoulder. Gus was barking wildly. In Mike's hands the hatchet, fresh blood dripping from the blade. "What the hell are you doing?" I roared, rushing at Mike. But he moved fast, terrifyingly fast, eyes wide glassy, swung the hatchet. Barely dodged it, felt the wind of it whistle past my ear. I tackled him. We hit the ground hard. He hissed right in my ear. "It wants you, Jake. It always wanted you." A natural strength, he shoved me aside, scrambled back to his feet. Colton was moaning, clutching his shoulder. Flames danced, casting crazy shadows on the cabin walls. Hit me then, with real horror. Mike wasn't just trying to hurt us. He was trying to kill us. Or capture us. Words coming out of his mouth were just incoherent. Like he was half possessed. Rambling about offering a sacrifice, so would let him go. Gus lunged at Mike, teeth bared. Mike kicked Gus away, sent him yelping across the cabin floor. I grabbed my knife, faced Mike. Rain blew in through the broken windows. Thunder rattled the cabin. Linda screamed, helpless on her stretcher. Colton tried to stand, collapsed again, blood staining his uniform. "You gave Kyle to this thing, didn't you?" I said, voice tight, through clenched teeth. "You lured him out here for some damned experiment." Mike's eyes flickered with rage. "It's bigger than you know, Jake. The Wendigo, it thrives on human minds, on fear and desperation. We studied it, wanted to harness it. We needed bait. But it turned on us. He pointed the hatchet right at me. I'm sorry about your brother, but I'm not going to let it take me too. I advanced, knife raised. I'll kill you before you take anyone else. He laughed. Hollow, manic sound. You think you can? Then he looked past me, like he was listening to something else. And then he just ran straight at me, hatchet raised high. Next few moments, blur. I sidestepped his attack. Knife caught him across the ribs. He howled, staggered. But the wound didn't slow him down much. Gus recovered, leaped at Mike's leg, teeth sinking in. Mike shrieked, trying to shake him off. Gave me an opening. Tackled Mike again. We crashed through the rotten front door, tumbling out into the rain and mud. Wind howled around us. Lightning flashed, lit up Mike's twisted face. Looked almost inhuman, teeth bared, eyes bulging. It's here, he muttered. It's coming. Then his voice changed, went almost gentle. Jake, he whispered. It's in my head. Felt a pang of pity, crazy as it sounds, until he swung the hatchet at my neck, jerked back, slipped in the mud. Mike pinned me, pressing the hatchet down. Blade right at my throat. Muscles burned, fighting to keep it away. Then, flash of lightning right overhead, and a shape appeared behind Mike. Tall, gaunt figure. Icy chill washed over me. Limbs all wrong, elongated. Head crowned with twisted horns. Stench of decay hit me like a wave. Mike felt it too. Cried out, scrambled off me. The shape lunged. Impossible speed. Snatched Mike by the shoulder. Heard bones snap. Mike screamed, hatchet falling from his grip. Creature's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. I grabbed my knife, crawled backwards. Gus barked, circling that horrifying tableau, but wouldn't get too close. Creature let out this sickening, wet growl. Mike thrashed, screams echoing in the storm. Then silence. Creature dragged him into the trees. Just like that, Mike was gone. Again. Staggered back into the cabin, soaked, shivering. Colton was pale, leaning against the wall, wound still bleeding. Linda was whimpering. Delirious, Gus's ears were pinned back, tail between his legs. Stared at them, mind reeling. Shock, exhaustion, everything just crashing down. Mike was all worse. Taken by that ego. The Wendigo Colton coughed, wetly, gestured for me to help him. Tore a piece of cloth. Pressed it against his shoulder. We can't stay here, he rasped. Booty, that thing is out there. Despite everything, we both knew staying in the cabin was suicide. First light, we'd make a run for the bigger ranger station. Waited through the endless night, clutching our weapons. My knife, Colton's sidearm, small caliber pistol, he carried for wildlife protection. He'd dropped it in the fight, but I'd found it by the dying fire. Dawn came cold, grey rain still sheeting down. Colton was woozy from blood loss, Linda barely conscious. Rigged the stretcher again, set out, using some trail Colton said led north. Gus walked ahead, nose low. Couple of hours later, we heard a weak cry from behind us, spun around, and there he was. Dave, stumbling through the rain, face pale as death. Impossible. He should be dead, or at least grievously injured. But there he stood, clothes tattered, eyes black hollow. Mike, I called, even though every instinct screamed something was terribly wrong. He took a step forward, swaying like a broken marionette. Mouth hung open, no words came out. Rain dripped from his slack jaw, mixing with dark streaks of blood on his chest. Gus growled, backing up, fur on end. Colton raised his pistol. Jake, that's not Mike anymore. Suddenly, Mike rushed at Colton. Unearthly speed. Guttural scream ripped from his throat. Colton fired. Shot hit Mike in the torso. Barely slowed him down. Meek tackled Colton to the ground. Gun flew from Colton's hand. I scrambled for it, but Linda's stretcher tipped. She cried out in pain. Split second of distraction. Mike seized Colton's head, slammed it against a rock. Skull cracked with a sickening thud. Heard Linda screaming. Gus leaped at Mike, teeth clamping on his arm. Mike roared, twisting, trying to shake Gus off. But Gus held on. Snatched the pistol, aimed it right at Mike's head. Stop, I yelled, desperation choking my voice. Mike's black eyes glistened with madness. Then he let out this horrifying laugh. Sounded like multiple voices at once. The Wendigos, maybe others. I fired. Bullet tore through his temple. Mike slumped to the side, taking Gus down with him. Gus yelped, then scrambled free, trembling. I crawled to Colton. Gun. Blood pooled around his head, eyes staring blankly at the sky. Linda sobbed on the ground, clutching her broken ankle. Stood there, pistol shaking in my hand, looking down at what was left of Mike. Chest still rose and fell in faint spasms, but his eyes lifeless. I'd just killed my oldest friend. Again, the Wendigo, or whatever had possessed him, had forced my hand. No time to mourn. Forest around us felt suffocating, like it was closing in. Gently lifted Linda back onto the stretcher, kept walking. Tears of rage and grief mixing with the rain on my cheeks. Gus limped beside me, shaken but alive. Felt like hours. We reached a gravel road. Heart soared with relief. Then I saw it. Black SUV parked under the dripping branches. Standing by it, woman with dark hair, tight ponytail. The black jacket, Agent Victoria Hayes. Held out her hands, voice calm. You must be Jake Hunter. How do you know my name? I asked, lowering Linda to the ground. Gus sniffed the air, uneasy. She flashed a badge. FBI. We've been monitoring certain activities in this region. Been tracking that ranger station's distress calls. Glanced at Linda's injuries, then at me and Gus. And I've been tracking you. Something about her, too calm. Didn't even look surprised at the blood staining my clothes. We found Ranger Reed, she said, voice neutral. He's no longer with us. I just nodded, trembling with exhaustion and sorrow. He was killed. Agent Hayes moved towards Linda, checked her vitals. We can get you both medical attention, but first, you need to tell me exactly what happened. Tone brooked no argument. Hesitated. Creature out here, something inhuman. Killed Reed and my friend Mike. She studied my face. We've heard the rumors. Bureau is aware of the local folklore. Sighed, almost warily. Listen to me, Mr. Hunter. Certain things in these mountains can't be explained so easily. My job is to make sure panic doesn't spread. Hit me then. FBI might be more interested in a cover-up than the truth. Anger, disbelief welled up. People are dead. My brother disappeared here. Don't you want to stop this thing? She paused, eyes flicking to Linda, then back to me. Our priority is to keep the public safe. You'll cooperate, and we'll see to it that you and your friend here get the treatment you need. Voice cold as the rain. Helped Linda into the SUV. Agent Hayes asked me to put my knife and broken rifle in the trunk. Gestured for Gus to jump in. He wouldn't budge. Planted his feet. He's traumatized, I said. She shrugged. He'll catch up. Tried to coax Gus, but he refused. Just looked at me, sorrowful eyes, like telling me this was as far as he could go. Didn't want to leave him, but Linda was dying, and my body felt like it was about to collapse. Heavy heart, I slid into the front seat. Hayes started the engine. Glanced back through the window. Saw Gus standing in the rain, ears drooping. He barked once, mournful sound. Then he turned, disappeared into the trees. Surge of guilt, but I had no choice. Had to get Linda to safety. Drove in tense silence. Wipers slapping away the water. Linda slipped in and out of consciousness. Miles later, finally gathered strength to ask Hayes. You said you've been investigating. Did you know about the disappearances before? She kept her eyes on the road. Yes. Bureau has a special interest in areas where unexplained incidents occur. We keep them contained. Anja flared. You let people die. You let Dave, my brother, voice cracked. Hayes' hands tightened on the steering wheel. Don't assume you know the entire picture, Mr. Hunter. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. These creatures, these phenomena can't be eradicated, only managed, and the public must never know. Looked back at Linda. Eyes rolled shut, breaths shallow. Moment I considered overpowering Hayes. Too exhausted. Mind spun with Kyle, Mike Colton, and the Wendigo. Secret horrors hidden in these mountains. Bigger than me. Bigger than anyone. Eventually, we reached a paved road. Hayes made a call on a secure device, hushed tones. Arranged for an ambulance to meet us at a remote side road. Minutes later, ambulance arrived, lights flashing. 2 paramedics rushed to Linda. Hayes spoke briefly with them, then turned to me. Thea'll take you to a hospital in Enterprise. Once Linda's stable, you'll both be debriefed. You will not mention anything about a supernatural creature. Do you understand? Glared at her. Or what? She held my gaze, no blinking. Or you'll never see the outside of a classified facility again. We can't have that, can we? Said nothing. Just let the paramedics load me onto a second stretcher, for good measure. That week in the hospital, last glimpse of Hayes was her standing by the black SUV, phone pressed to her ear, wind whipping her ponytail. Eyes cold, calculating, like she was already figuring out how to bury this whole story. Days later, woke up in a hospital bed. Linda in a nearby room, recovering from surgery on her ankle. Authorities came to question me. Said Ranga Colton Reed died in a rock slide. Mike Davis missing, presumed dead. No mention of the Wendigo. No mention of the half-eaten corpse. Carefully crafted official version. Told the local sheriff my half-truth story. Attacked by some large predator, maybe a bear. Storm cut us off. Ranger Reed and Mike didn't make it. Sheriff believed me. Or pretended to. Shook his head, said, "Mountains no good." Filed his report. Agent Hayes never visited again. But I felt her presence everywhere. Other agents discreetly taking statements, advising hospital staff how to handle questions. Linda and I were strongly encouraged to keep quiet. We did, for our own safety. Parted ways after we were discharged. Each too traumatized to speak about it. Left Enterprise as soon as I could. No home to return to. No cabin. No real life left, really. Mostly, I'm just haunted. Memory of those black eyes, that twisted face, Mike's last moments. Shame for leaving Gus behind. Small part of me hopes he survived out there. Or, maybe he found Kyle's spirit. Don't know. Still picture him, standing alone in the rain. loyal to the last. Wish I could say I found closure. Truth is, I live with the nightmares every day. Sometimes I hear Mike screaming in the darkness. Other times, I hear my brother calling for help, echoing through the pines. Occasionally, I think I hear a low growl. Wonder if Gus found his way home. Wallowa Mountains hold secrets that'll never see the light of day. Government will deny it, call it hysteria, tragic accident. But I know what I saw. Wendigo is real. It's out there, feeding on our worst fears, preying on desperation, hunger, greed. Never satisfied. Don't know where I'll go next. Part of me wants to go back, look for Gus, find any trace of Kyle. But I can still hear that raspy moan in my nightmares. Quiet of night, catch myself straining to hear my brother's voice on the wind. Wendigo might still be calling me, beckoning me back to those haunted woods. Tell myself I'll never go back. But deep down, know someday I might, because part of me remains in the Wallahs, lost among the towering pines, at the mercy of an ancient hunger that can never be quenched. And if I do return, I know I might not make it out alive.
Without remembering what we found or what found us out there. insane. We're being hunted. He pointed his gun at me again. I'm not going back to the real world without that bag. You're coming with me, both of you. Chris wiped tears from his eyes, staring at Jake like he'd never really seen him before. We just saw. I don't care what you saw. Jake yelled. Help me carry my gear, or I'll leave you both for that thing. and so